All right, let's write some Rust. So before we dive in, we're going to actually do this according to Solana's recommended structure for repositories for Solana apps. Now, this is all driven through Node.js. So I encourage you guys to go download Node.js. Make sure you get NPM as well. And make sure you use NVM if you're using Windows subsystem for Linux. It looks like this right here. This is actually really helpful to get the most recent versions of Node and NPM if you're using WSL2. Either way, once you've got Node and NPM set up, you're going to want to actually do our repository setup like this. So we'll start by just creating a directory outright. And we'll do hello Solana. And now inside this directory, we're going to add a package.json. And all of you JavaScript guys know exactly what's going on here. And also a source folder. And now if we pop open our terminal here, and we go into source, hello Solana /source. Once we're inside this directory, we can now do a cargo new. That all too familiar cargo new. But this time we're going to do a lib. And we're just going to call it program. So, new library program package. And this should look pretty familiar, right? Now, let's ignore the Node.js and NPM setup for just a second. And let's go right into the Rust. Because, I mean, that's what we came here for, right? So, diving right into the Rust, we're going to first want to set up our cargo toml, of course. So, I'm just going to copy paste the dependencies in there. There's only a few of them. And we'll talk a little bit about them. Obviously, the main ones are going to be Solana. So, we got Solana program test, and Solana SDK. Those are all important, and we're going to use all of them. And then down here, this is actually a configuration for our lib that determines what kind of crate that this is going to create. Now, you don't have to worry about what these are right now, but basically this flag here and this configuration will allow us to create a .so file which will run Solana programs. So super important, save that. And now that that's good to go, we're going to go into our librs file. We're going to blow all of this stuff away. And all we have to write here is our use statements. So I'm just going to copy these in here, of course. And these are the ones that we're going to use, with the most important one being entry point. Because entry point is a macro. And we write it like this. And this is all according to Rust's specific document on Solana, also the official Solana docs. This is how you set up a Rust program for Solana. You establish this entry point using the macro. And then you just go ahead and write your function. And we're going to call this function process instruction, as you can see. That's what you're going to find in a lot of the docs on Solana. And I'm just going to copy this function in here. And as you can see, we're just telling Solana, enter our program on process instruction. And that's, of course, right down here. And as parameters, you could find this on Rust docs on Solana. This is what any entry point is going to need by default to include as parameters. So we've got the program ID. We've got the accounts that are going to be allowed to conduct business with this program. And then any instruction data comes in as a byte array. Now you can see the orange flags there because we're not going to use any of those right now. We're just going to display this message here just to show you guys just an example that our program is getting hit on the chain and running. Just a quick call out. Solana actually has some really intricate design patterns in their SDKs. And one of the most notable is this message macro. They wrote this specifically because they felt that the print line macro that we've seen before was, quote, computationally expensive. So you can see it's kind of cool. They've put a lot of work and a lot of effort into making sure that the code that they're using is really, really fast, high performance. But anyway, so this is going to do the same thing as print line. It's going to just print this out as a log. And this is really all you have to do. This is it. We don't need any other files. We don't need to do anything else. This is how you create a program or a smart contract or whatever you want to call it on the Solana network. This is it. And as you can see and imagine building out from this, entering right here, this is like your main function. And then any Rust files that you include in your program, in your source, will all just be part of this program that you're writing here. So pretty cool, but this is all it takes. So once this is done, what we can do is we can actually build this thing out with cargo, right? And I'm going to do that from WSL. So I'm over in our directory here. I'm going to CD into hello Solana. I'm going to CD into source as well, and CD into program. And then I'm going to do cargo build, but I'm not going to do a traditional cargo build. I'm going to do a cargo build BPF. And that's because BPF is actually the byte encoding that Solana uses to encode your applications. So it's not your typical binary runtime. Obviously, this is a lib anyway. It's a little bit different, and it's specifically tailored to run on the Solana network. So we're going to do cargo build BPF. And this is going to take a minute. So I'm going to let this thing run, and I'm going to fast forward. So our program just built, and you can see that we immediately get instructions here from the Solana SDK that tells us how to deploy it. And you can see Solana program deploy, and then there's the path to our hello solana.so. And now we can go ahead and deploy that. So let's just copy this command and let's just run it. And there you go. We just deployed that program to the Solana DevNet, just like that. Now we are already configured for the Solana DevNet, right? So just do Solana config get to view your configs. We did this in the last video. We are already set up for the DevNet. So when we ran this Solana deploy, Solana program deploy, it already knew to use the DevNet. We already had keys set up. We did all that in the last video. But what's cool about this is we got this program ID as a result of our deployment. And this is actually the address of your program on Solana. So if you do Solana program show, and then just do programs, you actually can see any running programs that you've put on the network thus far. So it takes a second, but once it comes back, you'll get those program IDs. So as you can see, there's a few different programs that I have deployed out there. Our most recent one being this one right here. And that's really all it takes to deploy a program out to Solana. It's that easy. The tricky part, though, is actually running this program and triggering it. And that's where the Node.js stuff comes into play, right? So we're going to dive into what that's all about. And we're going to actually build some code that's going to trigger this program ID. And we're going to see how this thing runs on the network. So let's dive back into our application here. And we talked about this being NPM, and we're going to run this with Node.js and yada yada. So what we want to do is actually go into, just going to go back into the root directory, hello Solana. And we want to install the Solana Web3 SDK here. And it's actually a wrapper around Solana's JSON RPC API. So real quick, what this API does is it's literally just an API to interact with the cluster. So if you notice from that command here, you saw that the DevNet URL is this API.devnet. And that's all this thing is. It's just an API. And you can hit it with different requests and conduct different operations on Solana. And that's exactly what all of this documentation here is all about. If you look on Solana's official docs, you got the JSON RPC API. That's the raw API that all of this stuff is really using. And then the Web3 JavaScript API is built around this. And you can actually download that with this npm install command right here. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Again, this is just a wrapper around Solana's official API. And it's going to allow us to write a little bit of JavaScript to do some operations that you otherwise could just conduct over like a traditional API call. The reason we're going to do this with code is because, as you can see, these are all encrypted strings. And, you know, it's tricky to kind of create an encrypted string that has all the things that you need, including like instructions and whatever. So it's easier to just represent it in code with Solana's SDK that is available for JavaScript. So that's exactly what we're going to do. Hopefully that makes sense. I know it's a mouthful. But either way, we're going to use this command and we're going to install Solana Web 3. Now, really quickly before we run this, I just want to mention that you actually should just remove this empty package.json. If you do that, then this npm install command will actually create that for you. So when you install the Solana SDK here, you're going to actually get that package.json, and then we'll go and modify it. So you let this thing finish up, and once it's done, you'll have the Solana SDK, and like I said, you will have a package.json in here, and it'll look like this. Now, I'm just going to copy in what my package.json looks like after I add all of my changes. And it's not really too much to unpack here. So we've got some information about our app, including the URL to my GitHub here. And down here is all of our dependencies, including the node version we need at least. Now here, under scripts, this is one of the key parts right here. So in NPM, for those of you who don't know, you can define your own custom scripts here to run with NPM. And so this one, start, is going to use tsnode to actually boot up this TypeScript file that we're going to create. Don't worry about that. Clean, as you can see, is going to do clean program, which we've defined down here to be a cargo clean. And then there's cargo build BPF, which we saw already, and cargo test BPF, which does exactly what you might think it does. And you can see that we're pointing it to the manifest here, so it knows what directory to get it from. And all in all, we're just using npm to direct cargo within our program. And this is why I said you could have multiple programs within the same repository, because you could just build your scripts out to manage more than one program file here, or more than one program folder, and have multiple Rust programs going in here. Either way, as you can see, this is our only TypeScript command here that actually does not involve Rust. Doesn't involve cargo or anything like that. And it lives in this client folder here, so we're going to go create that. So now we've got our client and our program. The program is going to be our on-chain program written in Rust, and the client is going to be technically our off-chain program written in TypeScript. Now, you don't need to know too much about TypeScript to learn all of this stuff, but I will say that there's a ton of JavaScript support for Solana and for the API, and honestly for a lot of crypto things out there, not just Solana. So it's good to maybe pick up, at least at first blush, some TypeScript experience. But either way, to this extent, this is what it's used for. So in our client main TS, we're going to just add some imports here. And this is going to be a bunch of different things from our Solana Web3.js dependency that we went and installed. And we'll cover what each of these are going to do as we see them laid out in the code. Next, what we're going to do is establish a constant that's going to represent our key pair that we use to deploy the application. Now, don't worry. You might not recognize what this is looking for, but if you see this hello Solana keypair.json, we actually saw this before when we deployed our application. And if we look at our previous command, going back up here, we can see that it lives over in source program target deploy hello Solana. So let's go there. And in here, you also have the key pair. And that key pair is what we're going to actually try to look to resolve here. But obviously, we're pointing to a different directory. And that's because in the package.json, I've actually added this option here to determine where the output file is going to actually land. So when you run cargo build BPF, like you saw me do earlier, this time we're pointing it to a different manifest because we're obviously living inside a little bit different repository structure. And we're also telling it to put it into this dist program folder just to make life easier for our TypeScript file to find it later. So no big deal there. Anyway, moving on, we're going to create our main function in TypeScript. And this is going to drive our entire thing. And the point of this TypeScript app really is to trigger our program on the chain, to go in and create a transaction with our program ID that is written to the Solana chain. So that's all that this is really doing. So We're going to just add a little bit of like a print statement here just to say like launching client. And the first thing we're going to do now is connect to the Solana network. So we're going to connect to the DevNet here. As you can see, there's our DevNet API URL there. So we're using the connection object that we pulled in. And that's obviously our first thing that's involved with the Solana Web3 JS dependency. So that allows us to create a new connection. And the next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to derive our program's public key, the one that we created, the program that we built in Rust. So that looks like this. We're going to walk through, and our secret key string is just going to be a read-in of that file. We're going to parse the secret key. Then we're going to generate a key pair from the secret key. And then we're going to get that public key from the key pair. So all this is really doing here is now we've just got ourselves set up with the API, and we went and got the public key for our program. Now the next step is pretty important. The next step is where we actually have to do, like we've seen before, we have to go ahead and create ourselves an account so that we can do business on Solana, right? Like when we saw in the first video, when we downloaded the CLI, we had to create ourselves a key pair and then do an airdrop. Well, that's exactly what we're doing here, right? So we're generating ourselves a new key pair. This is the same thing as doing Solana keygen new. And then we're doing an airdrop. And we use this LAN ports per sol constant. It's the number of LAN ports in one sol. So just providing this is going to give us one sol for an airdrop. Okay? And as you can see, we're using our public key. We're requesting an airdrop to our public key. So far, as we go through this, we've got our program's key, our program's public key, and we've got our public key. We've got both of these bits of information available. Now, we need to use this information to conduct a transaction. And because we didn't write any kind of specific instructions or anything crazy, we don't have to worry about doing anything with the instructions. Look, we've pretty much omitted all of these. Actually, we have completely omitted them. So it doesn't matter what we really pass in. What we need is these two things. Our instructions they're just moot. So let's go ahead and see what that looks like. This right here is how you conduct a transaction with the Solana Web3.js wrapper. So we add this print statement, and we're just going to say we're pinging the program, and then we obviously print the program ID. And then here we create a new transaction instruction. And we do that by providing our keys. So as you can see, this array type thing that we're passing in, the program ID that we're going to hit, and then the data. And once we provide these instructions, this is the part where this underlying SDK that we've gotten from Solana Web3 is going to actually build that encoded string as transaction instructions. And finally, we're going to hit that send and confirm transaction. So this is going to do the send transaction API call that we were just looking at earlier, and then confirm it. So now back in our program here in our TypeScript file, just one more time real quick, this is really all that we're doing here with this code is we are just connecting to the network. We're grabbing our program's public key. We're generating our own key pair with an airdrop. And then we're building a transaction instruction with our key, the program ID, and our data, which is just going to be zeros right here. And then we're going to send that transaction. And this is akin to just doing a ping on our basic Rust program that we have. So now that that's all set up, we start by doing npm install. And that will download all the dependencies and set up your app. Now, once that's done, since we saw that our package JSON has those configurations in here to run these cargo commands, we're going to actually run those. So we're going to do npm run build program. And as you can see, this is going to start running that cargo build BPF like we talked about. And I'm going to fast forward this part because it takes a while. Okay, and now you can see that that thing built just like we saw before. And this time, our path is a little bit different, right? Like we told it that we wanted to put it to this dist folder. And so that's where this thing lives now. So we're going to actually do this Solana program deploy again. I'm going to get a fresh deploy with a fresh key. And there we go. So now we've deployed our new program, and taking a look at our Solana programs. Let's just look at all of them, keeping in mind that our program ID starts with this AEO. And you can see there's our program right there. And now here, I mentioned this in the last video, if we do Solana logs, we're obviously going to just get a constant stream of logs. And I mentioned that you want to like grep out your program ID. So that's what we're going to do here. So I'm going to just take this previous one out of here that we had. And I'm just going to copy in our new program ID. Make sure I got the right one here. And we're going to run that. And now it's going to wait on these logs until it finds our program ID. Cool. So now that in this terminal, we've already done npm install. We built our cargo program, which is our Rust on-chain app. And now we're going to do npm run start. And as you can see from our script, that's just going to run this TS node main TS. All it's going to do is just run our main TS script. And real quick, we just can't forget to add our trigger here that tells it to run the main method, of course. And so bringing these terminals back up, let's fire this thing off. There's our launching client program. We pinged our program and boom, there's the logs. As you can see, every time we run that TypeScript file, every time we run that script, we're going to ping this program. And we're going to get this hello Solana log every time. And there you go, guys. That is all it is right there. We wrote this TypeScript file just as an executable script to come in and transact with our Rust program. And there it is in that lower terminal. That's your Rust program just running on the Solana DevNet. And we're just hitting its address and kicking it off. Super, super cool. And as you can see, we can build out from there, and we will. But appreciate you guys watching, and I hope you're as excited as I am.